Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, I would just like to confirm if you can hear me from your end clearly. Just hit the like button or heart. Yes. Thank you so much. Just the usual. Okay, so today we're going to cover the next module. This is already the module 3. No? So we have time to meet on Friday this week as in face to face. So this discussion will be related to what will happen by then. Okay, so let's begin. Module 3 will be about the problem solving and reasoning. So we're going to learn how we can use math. Of course, it's related to math, it's problem solving, but how we can also make use of the reasoning to solve different problems. And we will also learn about the strategy. In fact, there are 3 parts as usual for per module. I would want you to understand it in 2 parts, meaning each part would cover the specific topic, and so it's easier to grasp before we proceed to the next part until it's all covered with the module. But in each module, they're all related, so each part are interconnected with each other. So let's begin. These are the objectives that we would like to achieve at the end of this module. Now, first is for us to use different types of reasoning to justify statements and arguments made about mathematics and mathematical concepts. We also want the students, you guys, to write a clear and logical proofs making use of this topic about problem solving and reasoning. Next is to solve problems involving patterns and recreational problems following a specific strategy. We call it the Polias 4 steps. Okay, so we'll also cover that. And lastly, we have to learn how to organize one's methods and approaches for proving and solving problems. Okay, so these are the only 4 that we would like to achieve for this module, and hopefully we can achieve it. So first is we will cover an inductive and deductive reasoning. Second is problem solving with patterns. And lastly, we would be covering a strategy in solving a specific problem. But this strategy could be applied to any kind of problem, right? It may not be only applicable for math, but you could actually use it in your life situations. So there will be a strategy to be introduced to you guys, and then of course whatever is introduced to you, it's always up to you how you can make use of it. What we know is that the things that we cover in math in the modern world are supposedly useful in the modern world. That's why it's called that way. Okay, so it's always up to the end receiver, which is the students, on how you can make use of them. Okay, so let's start. The first one would be about inductive and deductive reasoning. I'm sure most of you are already making use of this. You just don't know how to label it, or you just don't know what is the, probably some of you might not know that the term to use in the way that you reason out. So this time we're going to formalize that, and you don't need to remember them. It's just that it's a concept that we can also we can keep in mind so that we can reason out properly. Okay, so these are the very common reasoning, and so we will cover these 2, inductive and deductive. This will be inferring from previous occurrences of similar circumstances, right? So we're not here at the present, not if not because of our past. So some people in philosophy would even say that you have to learn from the past so that you can proceed with the future that we have in mind, ideally. So we learn things in the way that we can see pattern, how it is done in the past, and probably we can also make use of the challenges or the opportunities that they could have done, no? So we can do better at present and especially in the future. So these are also important things that we have to keep in mind. In fact, my great friend Alfred Montapert also mentioned to me during our breakfast, he said, expect problems and eat them for breakfast. and that's very timely when we were able to meet. No, so um, that's true. You have to be ready. You have to always be anticipating a problem to solve. Or not that you have to be conscious or anxious about a problem to come. You're just ready for anything. That's all that we want to achieve, right? And that's something that you can do if you learn how to reason out, how to solve problems with probably a step to follow, right? So that's part of the goal of this module. Now, it was also said before that logic is the science of correct reasoning. In fact, mathematical logic was covered in the previous module. So we're able to see there that statements could be true or false, and it cannot be both. So you have to remain truthful if you want to be consistent with your stands, whatever it could be. No? So you have to make sure that it's logical, and so it would make sense to whomever you're delivering it to. So how do we distinguish inductive and deductive reasoning? Some people would actually mistaken each to the other. So we have to make sure that we know the difference of the two. As mentioned earlier, these are the methods to make inferences and to develop statements about a concept, not only mathematical, but in this context, we'll use it mathematically and in any phenomena, okay? So this is a figure to simplify further what is inductive and deductive reasoning simply. So with the words inductive and deductive, they're actually the exact description of how it is done. So if you're reasoning deductively, you will start from a broad idea or a general. Okay, you can start with a general concept and you try to break it down until you will get into the specifics of it or the bits of the facts that can be found in the idea that you just presented broadly. Okay? Or it's also possible that you can go the other way around. You can start with examples. No? You can also do that. You reason out with examples first. You mention the things that could develop or that could support your bigger idea or your bigger concept to make the audience understand what it is all about. No? So you can go from top to bottom. So this deductive reasoning can also be called a top-bottom. And inductive reasoning is sometimes also referred to as a top-down, a bottom-up rather. It's a, sorry, let me correct that. Deductive reasoning is a top-down reasoning, and inductive reasoning is bottom-up. So that's the other names of these reasoning. Now let's begin first discussing about the inductive reasoning. Later on, we'll also discuss separately the deductive reasoning. By the way, we will be giving examples specific to each reasoning so that you can also process it. Okay? So even if I would not be asking you to answer something in the chat box just for this module and for the instruction today, I would still want you to think at your end. Okay? Maybe you can answer the questions that I will also answer myself for the sake that we will also proceed smoothly with the discussion. Okay? So just keep in mind. So what is inductive reasoning? Let's take note that this is a process of making generalization based on a pattern of observations of the specific examples. Okay, so you can start with very specific examples until you come up with a bigger idea. So that's inductive reasoning. And that bigger idea, meaning it can be generalized, any kind of problem, is what we call a conjecture. In fact, this term is also used in the unsolved problems in mathematics. There were 7 in the past, and I think in 2000s, early 2000s, one of the 7 conjectures was solved. And so these conjectures are actually trying to generalize concepts. Let's say how you can explain that something could be present and at the same time absent. No? So there's that idea. And these are what we call a conjecture. So conjecture is the term to use as a conclusion in generalizing that could solve any kind of problem. So it was also just reinstated here. So this will be a repetitive information as the previous one, but the important part here in the slide is that it may or may not be correct. Okay, conjecture may or may not be correct. So it's still the same with the concept of a statement. It may be true or false, similar to that. Okay, that was also doubled. I will just erase that when I send the slides to you. Okay, now let's try it with an example. Let's begin with using inductive reasoning to predict a number. What comes next, right? Using numbers. So, how do we predict the next number using inductive reasoning? Let's start with these examples. Number 1, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So what would be next? Okay, so as you can see, there are patterns in the previous numbers. 3, 6, 9. I think we can use plus 3, right? So that is in fact, that is the pattern. So 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 3 is 9, and so on. So we know that what comes next to 15 is actually 18, because 15 plus 3 is 18. All right? Now, here's another example. 1, 3, 6, 10, 15. Okay, as you can see, there might not be a pattern there. But in fact, there is. It's actually possible that the number you add or subtract to proceed to the next number may not be uniform, but it has its own pattern. Okay, let's see this. 1 to 3, that is just plus 2. 3 to 6, just plus 3. 6 to 10 is plus 4. So as you can see, the numbers that you are adding together also has its own pattern. And that's okay. That is still part of the pattern that is present to this example. So for number 1, let's just go back to this before we answer number 2. We understand that the successive number is 3 larger than the preceding number. So we can predict that 3 larger than 15 should be 18. That's why 18 is the answer. For the example number 2, the answer should be 21, because 1 to 3 just plus 2, 3 to 6 that's plus 3, then plus 4 equals 10, plus 5 equals 15, then plus 6 must be 21. Okay, sometimes you can use any other kind of numbers. You can even use Fibonacci numbers here, right? So instead of adding similar something with pattern like the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can also make use of Fibonacci. So 1 plus 1 becomes 2, then 2 plus 1 becomes 3. And it will give you a different kind of sequence of numbers. But of course, the pattern still matters. So it has to be something that has a pattern of its own, so that it could also stand in itself. So we can understand that this is just an increasing difference in the preceding numbers. Okay, so for exercise number 1, this will be assigned to a group. So I already posted the activity. It's a group activity. By the way, your groupings is also available in the file attached to the assignment. This is under the assignment, but it is posted under the graded activity. Okay, so what will happen on Friday? So you will actually be doing a group reporting. So each group could have 4 members at most. In your class, I think there is one group that is 3 members only, because you're 39. Oh no, you're 38. There would be 2 groups that would be only 3 members. Yeah. Okay, so your group mates is part of the list that I included in the cello. So you just check the file. It should be available, or it should be visible by now. Yeah, it should be visible by 4 p.m. earlier. You can check it out later. Okay, so you can start working with your groups. So that is an example, that is an exercise that could be assigned to your group. Okay, so let's go over with another example. How do we use inductive reasoning in making a conjecture? Meaning a conjecture, we can generalize what could solve the same problem but different given. Okay, that's also possible. So we can make use of inductive reasoning for that. Consider this procedure. Pick a number, multiply the number by 8. Okay, add 6 to the product, and then divide the sum by 2 and subtract by 3. Sige, let's try this now as a class activity. Just this one, so that I can also get your participation. Pick a number. Don't tell anyone. Just choose any number. Okay, and then I will guess the number, the original number at the end. So think of a number. Multiply that by 8. Okay, you're done. I'm not expecting everyone to answer this, but maybe some of you can participate. And then add 6 to the answer after multiplying 8. And then divide the sum by 2. Meaning whatever the result after adding 6, you divide it by 2. After you divide by 2, you subtract 3. So minus 3. Okay, for those who are doing it, can you write your answers below or in the chat box, please? Okay, 34. Denise, your original number is not a whole number. Vivian, your original number is 3. Also, you, Sophia, you have the same number. Sam, your original number is 12. Azura, your original number is 10. Nathaniel is 4. Ethan, it's 2. Ramon, it's 3. Kimai, it's 2. Andrada, it's 2. Okay, so how do I know this? Of course, there's a pattern being involved. I think the final answer of Denise must be 36, if I'm not mistaken. And your original number should be 9. Okay, correct that if I'm wrong. But it shouldn't be 34. There's no... you will see why is 34 not possible. Okay, so how do we solve this? How do we come up with a specific solution that could solve any kind of problem related to this? That is a conjecture. So we will see here the solution. So original number, let's say you choose 5. 8 times 5 is 40. And then 4 plus 6 is 46. Divided by 2, it's 23. Minus 3, it's 20. What is the relationship with the original number and the answer? It's just multiplied by 4. That's why I know that Sam Acuzar, who answered 48, the original number is 12. And Azura, whose final answer is 40, has the original number that is 10. So right now, we can actually do that, no? We can infer from the concept or from the final answer with the process that we just did, and then we can already come up with a generalization that is we call as the conjecture. Okay, so if we start with 100, our final answer would be 400. That means the conjecture that following the given procedure produces a number that is 4 times the original number. And take note that this is inductive reasoning. So we will also see how it is done in deductive reasoning. No? We will do that in example number 5. So just wait for it. It might make more sense by then how it works. Okay? Now there's another exercise that could be done by the group. So you will if this is assigned to you, then you will report about this on Friday. Now, my great friend Galileo Galilei was also fond of using inductive reasoning in discovering how a pendulum completes a swing. All right? He called this the complete swing of a pendulum, meaning back and forth. That's a complete swing. He called it the period of the pendulum. And it depends on the length of the pendulum, meaning the rope connected to the ball. Okay, so you will see how it is. Okay, here. Okay, so back and forth is one swing, right? That is a period. Now, if the length of the pendulum in units, this units is 10 inches, meaning if it's 4, then it's 40 inches. If it's 9, then it's 90 inches long. So, he said, and he was able to justify inductively that the length of the pendulum is related to how many period of pendulum in heartbeats is being produced. So as you can see in this pattern, 1 to 1, 4 to 2, 9 to 3, 16 to 4, and you would realize that it's just the square root. No? The length, you square root the length, and then the final period would be the answer. So square root of 4 is 2, square root of 9 is 3, square root of 16 is 4, square root of 25 is 5. Okay, so of course, we did not include the numbers in between here. Maybe he also tried 30 inches, and then it would answer something with decimal. So we just didn't include that so that we can be fixed with our obvious and evident pattern, because it's easier to work with whole numbers. Okay, but it still works if it's 30 inches. Now, if a pendulum has a length of 49 units, what is its period? Okay, so obviously, we will just square root 49. So square root of 49 is 7. So the final answer in the period of pendulum is 7. Now, if the length of the pendulum is quadrupled, now what happens to its period? Okay, so obviously, if it's quadrupled, meaning, take a look at numbers here, 1 and 4. The answer is also 1 becomes 2. Another quadruple here. If from 4, we quadruple that, it becomes 16. What is the relationship as 2 becomes 4? So obviously, if the number of units is quadrupled, then the period is doubled. That is the pattern that we see. Okay, so this was the answer for letter A. The 49 units, then a period of 7 heartbeats. And for the B, it appears that quadrupling the length of a pendulum doubles its period. Okay, so you have to check on the previous numbers given so that you can come up with the next one. And it's very helpful. Now, there's another situation here. This is about a tsunami. Velocity in feet per second, and the height of the tsunami will be depending to that. So you would be answering A and B. As a group, you will report it, whoever will be assigned to this problem. Next. Now, conclusions based on inductive reasoning may be incorrect. No? We might think about it. Right now, we have seen examples earlier, and we would think that, oh, it works every time. As long as we observe the pattern of the previous numbers, we can predict the next one. In fact, that is not true. Inductive reasoning could be faulty. This is an example for that. So let's see here. This is an illustration of a circle and a point, and how many line segments can be drawn in connecting the points or the dots that you put around the circle, okay, or on the edge of the circle. So if there's one, of course, there's only one region. The regions are the divisions that is present after connecting the dots, right? So if there are 2 points, then you will connect that, there would be 2 regions. But if there are 3 points, there would be 4 regions. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then if there are 4 points, you have to connect it the way that it's all possibly done, right? So it now forms like a kite, and it divides it into 8 different regions. So 1 dot is 1 region, 2 dot is 2 region, 3 dots it's 4 region, 4 dots it's 8 region. And if we list that down in a table, this is how it would look like. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the number of regions would be 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. Looking at this, if you would see a pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's only a difference of 1, right? And then the connection or the relationship of the maximum number of regions, 1, 2, it just times 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, and 16 times 2 is 32. Now, you might think that that is correct. In fact, that is not correct. Because if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay, earlier we only stopped at 5, right? So how many regions will be made if we use 6 dots? In fact, there would only be 31 regions maximum. It's not 32, okay? It is only 31. Now, there appears a pattern at the start, but as you keep going, no, it will only break the cycle or the pattern. So, not 32 dots as you may have guessed earlier. With 7 dots, maximum number of region is in fact another odd number. It's 57. So it starts at 6 dots that the pattern is broken. Okay. Now this is an example when inductive reasoning might not be applicable. That's why we also try to do that. We will try to see how we can prove that, oh, this can't be done by providing a counter example. Counter example is finding at least one case that the statement would become not true. Okay? So as long as you can provide one counter example that would make the entire idea or concept not true, then it would already be helpful in solving the problem. You don't have to waste time in solving for it already. Okay, so you can already be ahead of the problem. So in example number 4, we verified that each statement is a false statement by finding a counter example for each. So let's try this. For all numbers of x, the absolute value of x is greater than 0. Now you might think that this is true because all kinds of number, if you put a number in the value of x here, in the substitute to substitute x here, you can use negative. Negative 2, it becomes positive. Oh, that's greater than 0. Oh, it's correct. Let's try another number, 1. So the absolute value of 1 is still 1. So 1 is greater than 0. Oh, that is still correct. And even if you try many numbers, it would still solve this one. But there's actually one that would make this not true. And what is that number? Anyone who can guess in the chat box? What do you think is that value of x? Very good, Ramon. It is 0 because 0 cannot be greater than itself. Now that in fact has similar concept of the letter B, x squared greater than x. If x is 1, 1 squared is still 1, and 1 greater than 1 cannot be possible. So it will now become a false statement when x is equal to 1. That is for letter B. For letter A, let's go back to that. If x is 0, then 0 is not greater than 0. Now that is a counter example. Okay? So that is the idea of counter example, to make the statement false. Okay, so there's another set of examples here that will be assigned to a group, and they will prove it and explain it in class. How can we find counter examples of the following? All right, now let's proceed to the deductive reasoning. No? As you have noticed in a previous one, the inductive reasoning will not work every time. It doesn't work every time. So you have to also try another way of reasoning out, and that is when you can use deductive. Just remember, deductive reasoning is a top-down process. So you start with a vague concept or a general idea, or we call general principle and procedures, and then you can break it down into pieces where you can provide assumptions or support it with examples towards the end. Okay, so you have to start with general idea and then break it down into the bits of that that is facts about that general idea. So let's try to answer this example number 5 using a deductive reasoning in establishing a conjecture. This is now the one that is related to example number 2. Okay, remember the procedure was and still is pick a number, multiply by 8, add 6, and divide by 2, then subtract 3. And we know and we understand that, as shown in the previous example number 2, that the original number will just be multiplied by 4. And that would be the number that someone would give you. So it's like magic, no? It's like magic, but there's actually math behind it. So some people would refer to that as mathemagic. Okay, so it's something that could interest someone. Maybe you would try to impress somebody or maybe a child that you know, and then you can use this magic. So anyway, so pick a number. A number may not be specific. We can introduce it as a variable. In this solution here, n can represent as that number. Okay, so n can be any number. In this way, we would have the same solution every time someone would give us, or someone would think of any number. No? So the one that I did earlier, that I guessed your original number, is actually the deductive reasoning part of it already, because I understand that 4 times n, or that number, is already the end goal of this mathematic. Okay, so we started with n and ended with 4n, and this procedure produces a number that is 4 times the original. Now here's a problem that could be related to this example. So it will be assigned to a group again. So you will be the one to explain to the class how is this solvable, or how can this be solved using deductive reasoning. Again, just remember that deductive reasoning, our goal here is to establish a conjecture, because the general idea is already provided, right? General idea is pick a number, multiply by number 8, and then add by 6, divide by 2, subtract 3. This is vague. So we have to break it down into a specific solution, and we ended up with 4n. Okay, so that is how we can establish a conjecture. Now, what is the difference, and how we can differentiate inductive and deductive reasoning from each other? So here's an example, number 6. Determine the type of reasoning that we use for each example. So letter A, during the past 10 years, a tree has produced plums every other year. Last year, the tree did not produce plums, so this year, the tree will produce plums. So basing it from the past events, then that could either be inductive or deductive. What do you think? Okay, so for letter B, let's just see letter B first. All home improvements cost more than the estimate. Okay, it says all home improvements cost more than the estimate. The contractor estimated that my home improvement will cost $35,000. Thus, my home improvement will cost more than that, more than $35,000. So if you think about it, and if you already have realized the difference of the two, A is actually an inductive reasoning, because it starts with the past events. And in the past, in 10 years, the tree only produces plums every other year. If it doesn't produce this year, then it should produce by next year. Now, so that's inductive. In letter B, as you notice, the starting statement says, all home improvements cost more than estimate. That's a general idea. That's already the big idea there. Now, if the contractor said that the estimate would cost around $35,000, so based on the generalization, we know that the total would cost more than $35,000. And that's how you can deductively reason out letter B. Okay, so here's the solution to that. Since it's providing specific examples, then we would say it is already inductive. But for letter B, since a conclusion is already a general assumption, then we can use deductive reasoning for this. And a specific matching problem would be reported and presented to the class by by the group that will be assigned to this number. Okay, now we're down to the part 2. I think we can still finish it before the time ends, don't worry. So problem-solving strategies. We will be introducing you to a problem-solving strategy, and this part will be focusing on finding a solution using experimentation. Okay, so just a brief history about problem-solving strategy. Ancient mathematicians like Euclid and Pappus were also interested in solving mathematical problems, and that is what they refer to as heuristics. Now, heuristics is just methods and rules of discovery and invention. This is the study of methods and rules of discovery and method and invention. Now, in 17th century, René Descartes, who also was the proponent of the Cartesian plane, he contributed to the field of heuristics. Now, he tried to develop his own universal problem-solving method. Okay? Although he was not able to achieve that, but still he was able to provide the rules for the direction of the mind. And this was in his book, Discours de la Méthode. Now, Wilhelm Leibniz, this is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, he's also famous on his discovery or invention of the calculus, simultaneously done with Isaac Newton. So they were on different places. So the mathematicians were able to coincide their solution or their invention of the concept of calculus, and so both of them are now considered as the first mathematicians to introduce calculus. But aside from that, Leibniz also wrote a book on heuristics. He called it as the art of invention. Now, one of the problem-solving process Leibniz wrote, nothing is more important than to see the sources of invention, which are, in my opinion, more interesting than the invention themselves. Now, like the numbers, where are these numbers come from? Now, that could be the conjecture you can come up with is maybe it from the Mesopotamian. It could be from other civilizations that was able to discover it in the past, right? Now, how do you solve problems? This is a rhetorical question. How really someone solve a problem? And what strategies can be employed to effectively organize methods for problem solving? Now, let me introduce to you to Polya's 4-step problem solving strategy. 4-step meaning there's only 4 steps you need to follow. Now, this must be familiar to you because probably starting with grade 4 or grade 5, when you solve mathematical problems like a word problem, you will be told to provide the given, the what is asked, and then you will show the solution, and then at the end you will write the conclusion. So if your final answer is 3 units, so there in the question or what is asked is how many units are there in blah blah blah. So you would answer there are 3 units in blah 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 to make it more complete, right? So that's the idea. Now that is actually also common, but there is a more common or the cornerstone as considered to be the problem-solving approach. It's a cornerstone in mathematics education, and not only in math. In fact, it can be used to any kind of situation in solving a different problem. Now, this was introduced by a Hungarian mathematician, George Polya. So it is called after his last name, Polya. So Polya's 4-step problem-solving method. The first step is to understand the problem. Right? If you cannot understand the problem, you cannot provide a given. You cannot know what is asked. So it's somehow related. Devise a plan. You have to think ahead. How would you approach this problem? How would you solve this problem? And then you carry out the plan. You will show the solutions. And after the 3 steps, you will review your solution and you will come up with a conclusion. That's already part of it. Now, so these 2 things are actually related. But this time, we're trying to formalize the idea of problem-solving strategy. So we will follow every time, we'll follow these 4 steps that was introduced by Polya. So how does the organization of approaches impact the efficiency and effectiveness of solving complex problems? In fact, it is useful, right? I believe you're able to understand by now that organizing your problem solving, like using the 4-step method, could help you reach efficiently to the final answer. So what I will do now is I will provide examples here. Okay, after I would be able to elaborate what each step actually does. So in understanding the problem, you have to restate it in your own words. Meaning, if you really understand it, you can explain it in your own words. You identify the given information, determine what is being asked for, and then keep the goal in mind. You have to keep that in mind because that is when you will apply by devising a plan. So you have to look for patterns. Oh, how could I solve this? You can draw your own diagram. You can break the problem into smaller parts, or you can use a formula or an equation. And then you have to perform an experiment, meaning you have to carry out the plan. Now, you have to work carefully. You have to record all of the attempts that you made. And if the initial plan fails, you have to devise another plan, or you can just modify the previous one. Okay, so lastly, you will review the solution that you made and see that if it's still consistent with the facts that is being asked in the original problem question. And you have to interpret the solution by providing a generalization or a conclusion. So that's the 4 steps of the Polyas word problem-solving method. Now, what is the benefit of this? It gives emphasis on the importance of understanding the problem before solving it. It can be applied to a wide range of problem-solving situations, and it is a tool for anyone who wants to improve their problem-solving skills so that you're guided, you're following a step-by-step solution. So here's an example. A baseball team won 2 out of their last 4 games. Again, they have lost 4 games. And then they actually won 2 out of the 4. Now, in how many different orders could they have 2 wins and 2 losses in the 4 games? So understanding the problem, we understand that there are different orders in writing this. The team may have won straight games and lost 2 also straight. So WW or win-win, lose-lose. Or it could also be lose-lose, win-win. Or it could also be lose-win, lose-win, or win-lose, win-lose. Right? So your plan, you would devise a plan. You can make an organized list, and then you would carry out the plan. You would list them all down, WWLL, WLWL, and so on. You have list down all of the 6 possible orders. And review the solution. This list has no duplicates. And so it is all now the possibilities of getting 2 wins and 2 losses. And that's it. That's the answer. So you're able to figure out how many ways. So there are 6 possible ways that they would win twice and lose also twice in the last 4 games. Next problem. Determine the digit 100 places to the right of the decimal point in the decimal representation of 7/27. Understanding the problem, you know that expressing a fraction into decimal sometimes would give you a pattern. Since this is in fraction, most of the time it will really give you a pattern in the decimal part. No? But there are also numbers in fraction that I think it's really rare that there would be a fraction and it would end up with no pattern in the decimal places. Yeah, so only square root of 2 and then pi, those are not rational numbers. Okay, so anyway, so going back here, you can make a table and to look at pattern. So divide 7 by 27, and then you would get 259, 259, 259. That's always the pattern. Okay. Now it is asking about the digit 100 places. So how do we know that? Well, up to 99, diba, this is 259, 259. It repeats in the 3rd pattern. So we know that at 99th digit, it would still be 9. So next to that should be the 100th place, and that would be 2. So review the solution using the table. You can actually visibly write it on the table, and you would know that 2 should be correct. Okay, that is the 100th place digit of the decimal point by dividing 7/27. Next, what are the products, the product of the ages in years of the teenagers is 4590. None of the teens are the same age. What are the ages of the teenagers? Okay, so as we are given the problem here, we have to understand that we would determine what are the ages of those that are teenagers. So we start with 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That would give you a product of 45990. Okay? I think I missed the in the problem. It should mention about 3 teenagers. Okay? So devise a plan, guess and check, represent the ages by X, Y, Z. So that's why there's 3 teenagers. And then X, Y, Z is equal to 4590. So you can actually do a trial and error here. So that's the plan. Now, carrying out the plan, you would multiply 15, 16 times 17, then 15, 16 times 19, 15 times 16 times 18. You could also do 13 times 14 times 15, and you would know that that is lesser than 4590, so you have to make it bigger. Now, so we start with 15, 16, 18, which solves exactly the problem. That is 4590. Since it is the problem, it is the solution to the problem, by reviewing it, and even if we exchange the positions of 16, 15, and 18, as long as it's not repeating, we are actually at the right solution. So this is our answer. The ages of the 3 teenagers are 15, 16, and 18. Now, what are the common challenges faced when organizing methods for problem solving, and how can they be overcome? So you can take note of the challenges that you would notice while doing it, so you can also try to address it. Okay, so there's another problem here. Although this would not be assigned to any group, it's just something that we can also try to do if you want. And then there's another 2 problems. You don't have to do this, okay? It might be included lang in an asynchronous activity, so you would also try to work it on yourself. But our focus at this point is your reporting in the next meeting. Okay? Now, here's a problem that is related to polya. These are the problems that will be assigned to the groups. So this, and this. I prepared 6 problems. Okay? Now, let's move on to the last part of this module. I still have 12 minutes left. Okay, so we'll just maximize the time. This time, we will recognize both the evident and the hidden patterns. So we'll see that here. Now, pattern recognition as a problem-solving strategy. Earlier, you were told about George Polya. This time, we'll try to see how we can make use of pattern recognition to also solve a problem. Now, this section focuses on how to recognize both evident and even the hidden patterns by observing the cases of the problem. So here, we have the instance when 2 person is present, how many handshakes can be done? If there are 3 people in a group, how many handshakes can be done? And if there are 4 people, how many handshakes can be made? Now, given that you cannot repeat the handshake. So if P1 and P2 already handshake, you cannot let P2 and P1 handshake over again. Okay, so if there are 2 individuals, there would be 1 handshake only. If there are 3 individuals, of course, there's also 3 handshakes. And 4 individuals would have 6 handshakes. So how many do you think will be handshakes for 5 individuals? So if you see into the pattern, it just increases by 1 in the individuals. And then in the number of handshakes, it just increases by 1 to 3 becomes 2. 3 to 6 becomes 3. I think this pattern was also given in the previous example. Okay, so this will be equal to 10. There would be 10 handshakes in the next when there is 5 individuals. And so on. So if there are 12, there would be 66 handshakes. Now, provide the information asked for the following scenarios. So in a certain gathering, participants greet each other through handshake. So it was already answered in the previous slides. So how many handshakes occurred when 2 people? Again, there's only one. If there are three, then there would be 3 handshakes. If there are 4, then it would be 6 handshakes. And if there are 12, then there would be 66 handshakes. Okay, so how do you know what is the formula? How can you generalize this? So nth term formula for a sequence is this. In some cases, we can use patterns to predict the formula. It's called nth term formula. So that whatever the number is given, you can already answer it immediately just by using this formula. So how do we know the formula for this? Let's try this example first. Consider a 10-item true or false question. In how many ways can you answer the first item? I think I was also able to introduce this during the mathematical logic. Okay, when there's 2 statements, there are 4 possible ways to answer it. If there's only one question, there's only 2 possible ways. It's only either true or false. But if there are 2 questions, there would already be 4 possible answers. If there are 3, it would be 8 possible answers. Now, how is that possible, or how is that being done? So, remember, if there's 2 items, so true, true, false, false, and then the other item would be possibly true, false, true, false. So, there are 4 possibilities to answer 2-item questions. And if there are 3 items, then there would be, these are the possibilities that you would answer 3 items. True, 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 then false, 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 then true, true, false, 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 true, true, false, false. And then we have true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. So there are 8 possible answers. With this pattern, I think we have mentioned this in the previous module as well. The pattern is actually just 2 to the power of n. So 2 to the power of 1 is 2, 2 to the power of 2 is 4, 2 to the power of 3 is 8, 2 to the power of 4 must be 16. So there must be 16 possible ways to answer a 4-item question that is in true or false instruction. Now, if there are 10 questions and it's still true or false, then there are 1024 ways. Okay? So the base here is 2 because there are only 2 options, true or false. But if it's a multiple choice, there could be 4 options, right? So 4 to the power of n in how many questions? Then 4 ways that you can answer 1 item. There would be 16 ways to answer 2-item question, and so on. So the 2 base here, just depending on the way that you will answer possibly the questions provided. Hence, we have 2 ways, 4 ways, 8 ways, and 2 to the power of n ways, and then 1024 ways for 10-item task, that is to answer true or false. And there will be a skills check-up to be posted related to this, problem solving using a pattern recognition. And that's it. That is the entire slides. We're just on time, everyone. So we're able to make use of 2 different types of reasoning. In fact, the inductive and deductive. We're able to write clear and logical proofs, how you can break it down using the deductive and inductive reasoning as well. And then we're able to solve problems using pattern by following the Polya's 4 steps. And lastly, it has to be implied, or it has to be something that you realize by now, that you can organize one's methods and approaches by proving and solving a problem. Okay, so that's it, everyone. Please prepare turning on your camera so we can also check the attendance.